Good morning, everyone. It's gratifying to see so many people out first thing in the morning after a late night. How many went to the auction last night? Great. Did you hear how much was raised? Over $8,000. And the sale of the guitar at the auction was included in that number, but the signatures that people paid to put their signature on it, that was, I think, an additional $1,300. So, yeah, close to $10,000. So, great. Thanks to all you who came out and paid money for things. You're one of the people that's just there to run the numbers up, right? Okay, good morning, everyone, and welcome to the 39th CALLERLAB Convention for probably the 8th time so far in the last couple of days. Today is Tuesday, April the 3rd, and this is the session named Great Expectations. And my name is Barry Clasper. There's a handout making its way around. You'll find that most of the material that I'm going to cover is all in the handout, but it's sort of written like a paper or a book, so it's not going to be easy for you to kind of follow along necessarily with what I'm doing. It won't be necessary for you to follow along, but if you'd like to, make a note or something on the handout, that's fine. But don't think you need to be reading the handout while I'm speaking. This is a bit of an unusual session for CALLERLAB because normally we have a format where we have a topic and we have some panelists and a moderator, and you have 3 or 4 people kind of giving their perspective on the topic. Today you just got me. And if that seems a little daunting this early in the morning, I won't be insulted if you choose to leave, but do it now. I'm going to take you on a bit of a journey, which isn't complete yet. I'm not sure where this goes, but it stems from some reading which I've been doing over the last year or so. The way this session came about is I'm a member of the EC, and we do the planning for the convention. And so when we were having the meeting, we were trying to decide what sessions we were going to have. I had got this germ of an idea, and I thought it would make a good session, but I wasn't really sure what it was going to be about. And I tried to describe it, and I waved my arms a lot and told them, I think this would be a good session, and they all went, yeah, Barry, okay, you do it. But I couldn't really explain what it was. And then I came across a book which took all this nebulous stuff that I kind of had whirling around in my head and just crystallized it for me. And the result of that is what you've got in your handouts. But I'm just still figuring out what it all means. So I'm kind of using you guys as, you're actually the second set of guinea pigs I've tried this on. I had the opportunity to do this for the Rochester Callers Clinic 3-4 weeks ago. And it went on for 2.5 hours. And then I got gonged because the caretaker had to leave and they would have had to pay more money for overtime if we didn't. So I've tried to abbreviate it somewhat from that presentation, but we probably are not going to get through everything that's in that handout this morning. But hopefully it'll give you a flavor for where it goes, and then you'll be able to look at the handout and kind of make your own extrapolations from there. Now what I'd like to do is start with a little demonstration. As the title of this session suggests, this is all about expectations, but perhaps not in the way that you might have envisaged just from looking at that word. The reading I've been doing was making it clear that modern science, modern neuroscience is starting to really prove that the human brain is probably the foremost pattern matching machine in creation, at least on this world. The human brain is always looking for patterns. And if you think about the evolutionary reason why that might have happened, the ability to see a pattern and therefore predict what's going to happen in the immediate future can have a very high survival value. So the brain is always looking for patterns, and when it thinks it's found a pattern, it starts making extrapolations about what's going to happen in the immediate future, which creates expectations. And in fact, in everyday life, you'll find that there's lots of mechanisms that operate on the basis of creating an expectation for you and then doing something with it. And here's an example. This video that I'm going to show you, it only lasts for a minute or two, is singer Bobby McFerrin. You all know that name? Talking about expectations at, well, I saw it on a TED Talk video, but in fact the title there says it's the World Science Festival in 2009. It's not really important that you be able to see well, so don't worry about it if you've got a bit of a glare or something, but you'll get the idea. No, it's not going to be that long.
Talking about expectations? Expectations. What? Okay. Yeah.
Now listen to what he says.
Now, what's interesting to me about that is, regardless of where I am, anywhere, every audience gets that. But it doesn't matter, that's just, the pentatonic scale for some reason.
If you're looking for a job in neuroscience, I think...
How many people know what a pentatonic scale is? How many people think that they could sing one? Some people who've had some musical training know what it is, but most people don't know what those words mean. And yet he had an audience of hundreds of people basically singing a pentatonic scale, and they figured out that that's what he was doing based on 2 notes. He gave them an interval between 2 notes, and from that whole audience extrapolated the pattern. And that's because the pentatonic scale, as it turns out, is ubiquitous in music. It's all over the place, and it's not just in our modern or our Western styles of music. It's in a lot of different cultures. There's something about the pentatonic scale that resonates with the human brain, so it occurs over and over again. Now here's another illustration. How many of you know who Dudley Moore is? So most of us know Dudley Moore as a comic actor. He was in the movie 10 and Foul Play, and he was fairly Arthur, well known for those kinds of roles. But he was actually, before he became famous over here, was a very well known comedian in the UK, and he was part of the Peter Sellers crew and the Monty Python and those guys. He was in that group. He was part of a group called Beyond the Fringe. And in addition to being a comedian, he's also a concert-grade pianist, or he was before he died. And he also used to give concerts and whatnot. What you're seeing here is something that was done in the late 50s, which is a parody of a Beethoven sonata. And I've sort of just clipped it so that there's a last minute and a half or so playing. And the picture is pretty crappy, but it's not really important that you be able to see the picture. It's the sound that matters. He's using the Colonel Bogey March as the theme for his parody. Why was that funny? And why were you expecting him to stop? Because you kept hearing these patterns, which we have been trained to recognize as the end is coming. And the reason this parody, if you're a classical music fan, Beethoven was known for his unending endings, so that was why he chose it to be a Beethoven parody. But, that's sort of the in-joke. Everybody gets the joke of this thing never ends. And again, that's sort of a universal thing, at least in our culture. I'm not sure what would happen if, you played this same clip, say, in China or Japan, where their music is somewhat different. I don't know if those same patterns would mean the same thing to them. But the point is that music is, of course, heavily based on patterns. And the enjoyment that composers create when they're creating music is by setting patterns up that we find enjoyable and which we start to predict where they're going. And then they do something with that expectation. They may satisfy it or resolve it. And if you're into music theory and stuff, that's called, resolving a progression or something like that, where you start something that seems like it's going somewhere and then you let it go there, and that feels kind of satisfying. It happened the way I expected. But then sometimes they put a twist on it and they take you somewhere else, and you go, oh, that was neat, because your expectations weren't actually met, but they go somewhere else that satisfies the rules that we have in our brain for where it might go. We have an expectation of where it's probably going to go, but we also have we also recognize that there are other places that it could legally go. And that if the composer comes up with something that we don't expect and yet still sounds good, makes us feel good or talks to us in some way, then we find that even more satisfying than if the progression is just satisfied the way we expect. Now, this realization was what got me thinking about this topic in the first place. And I thought, that's what we do as square dance callers. We play with the dancers' expectations. We do things that they expect until they feel comfortable, and then we try and do something that's unexpected to some degree. Not so unexpected that they can't do it, but unexpected enough that they go, oh, that was neat. And this was at about the point that I explained where I was in the EC meeting trying to wave my arms and explain what this topic was going to be about. A month or so later, I came across a book called Thinking, Fast and Slow. Anybody heard of that? It's on the New York Times bestseller list for a while now. By a Nobel Prize winner named Daniel Kahneman. He won the Nobel Prize in economics, but in fact, he's a psychologist. And he won the Nobel Prize for basically debunking the psychology that the standard economic theories assume is going on. And he had experimental data that showed that, in fact, human beings do not make decisions in the way that the normal economic models assume they do, and that therefore they're kind of built on sand. And this book, Thinking Fast and Slow, articulates a model of the mind that's becoming very prominent among psychologists. And it's not really describing like a structure you're going to find physically in the brain, but it's a model of the way our minds work. And the model is that we basically have two systems in our mind. They call them System 1 and System 2. The guy's a Nobel Prize winner, but he's not really very imaginative when it comes to naming things. System 1 is what often people think of as the unconscious. It's the stuff that goes on under the surface. And in the past, we've kind of regarded the unconscious as that mysterious thing in there that makes you dream funny things, but you don't really know what's going on. And it just kind of gets in your way. The unconscious is usually something that psychologists and psychiatrists make a lot of money out of probing and, revealing what's going on in your subconscious that's causing you to, hate your dog or whatever your problem is. In fact, there's a lot more going on there than was previously thought. What's really going on in System 1 is that's the automatic, effortless part of our mind that is always processing what's going on around us. So whatever you're doing, wherever you are, you're bombarded with sensory stimuli. There's stuff you're hearing, there's stuff you're seeing, there's stuff you're feeling. There are things you remember that just happened. There are things that you expect to happen based on what's going on right now. That happens every microsecond you're alive. Even when you're asleep, System 1 is processing data. That's how come you can wake up when the alarm goes off. That's how come when you hear a funny noise in the house, when you're asleep, it wakes you up. Because System 1 is always in there processing. It's automatic. You don't have to think about it. What System 1 is largely doing is pattern recognition. It's pulling all this data in, and it's hunting for the patterns in what's going on around us. And again, if you think about the evolutionary source of all this, if you're out in the woods and you're hunting and you hear a noise, you want to be able to figure out whether that noise is a lion getting ready to eat you or whether it's something you might be able to get for dinner yourself. And so you do some pattern recognition about what's the nature of that noise, just how did it sound like a growl, or did it sound like a chirp, something I might be able to kill myself. Your System 1 would just automatically come to a conclusion about what that noise meant. And you would find your conscious mind would not be saying, gee, I wonder what that noise is. You would just automatically have an answer pop into your head. And if you think about that, here's a little test. If I say the word clothing, so immediately when I said that, some stuff went on in your head, right? You might have had some instances of clothing sort of pop into your mind. So I said clothing. Now suppose I say top. What pops into your mind? Do you have things that are both related to clothing and related to top? Did some of you think top coat, top hat? And most of you probably did. Those two words now created an association, and that association related to certain stuff in your mind, and that just popped into your head, didn't it? You didn't go through any rational process to make that happen. The answer just materialized. That's system one working. System one is always processing what's going on around you. It's always trying to make these associations, create patterns out of them, and when it finds a pattern that it thinks is meaningful, it ships it to system two. System two is the part of our mind that we tend to think of as us, right? It's our conscious mind, our purposeful, effortful part of our mind where we think to ourselves, well, this is what I'm going to do next, and this is why I'm going to do it. I have all these reasons why I'm going to do it, and it's logical that I should do it this way, and I'm going to take these fixed steps to get there. That's the part of our mind that's system two. It's the part that we think of as us. In reality, it's maybe not even the greater part of us. And one of the things that Daniel Kahneman showed through experiment is, in fact, people don't use their rational minds to make decisions. They use their rational minds to justify the decision that system one has already made. System one did some pattern recognition, produced the answer, pops into your head, and you think, why would that make sense? And then you figure out a way to make that make sense in your rational mind. And that's the way people tend to make decisions. And in fact, if what system one produces is the wrong answer, we have to work pretty hard to countermand that answer and say, well, wait a minute, maybe that's the way it would feel good, but we should really do something else. So that's the way these two systems interact with one another. Now, another feature of these two systems is that system two can give instructions to system one. So system two can say, well, I need a hammer because I'm working on this project. And system one takes that as a task. And system one may think, okay, he needs a hammer. We could go to the store for a hammer. I know the hardware store down the street, sells hammers. Oh, wait a minute, I have a hammer in the basement. I could go and get that, but no, that hammer is too small for what I want to do. So, but I have a hammer in the garage that's bigger, so I could go and get that. But no, that one, the handle's broken, but my neighbor has a hammer. And all of that stuff is going on in system one, and you don't even know that it's happening. All you know is you say, I need a hammer, and the answer comes to you, I'll go ask Fred. I know he's got a hammer. But you didn't think about that. You didn't go through a rational process. Unless the problem was hard. If the problem was maybe more complex, and there wasn't an answer in system one, you didn't have anything in your memory about where you might find a hammer, Fred didn't have a hammer, you don't have a hammer, you don't know where any stores are that have a hammer, then you might have to think about, rationally in system two, what could I do to get a hammer? And you might go online and do a search on hammers and, try and find a store or whatever, but then you're into system two. System one is fast. That's the fast part of thinking, fast and slow. System two is slow, relatively speaking. System one gives relatively instantaneous answers. System two requires you to go through some stepwise kind of process in order to get where we're going. So that description of the way the mind works just kind of crystallized all this expectation stuff for me. Because what's going on as you're listening to music or as you're dancing is that your mind is listening to the patterns generating expectations based on those patterns. And then we, as square dance callers, are doing something with those expectations. Sometimes we do good things, and sometimes we do not so good things. But the fact is, that's what's going on. So, what I'd like to do is kind of take that model, and we'll explore some of the aspects of square dancing and kind of see how it fits. And as I said, I'm not going to get through everything that's in that handout. I'm already halfway into the presentation, and I haven't finished the introduction yet. So I'm going to talk about designing choreography, because we all like to talk about choreography. That's why we're here, right? And I'm going to talk about teaching. If we do have enough time, I'll talk a little bit about how it applies to sight calling. But there's actually all kinds of other aspects of square dancing that this model can apply to. If you think about programming evenings, think about programming seasons, the entertainment side of it, presentation side of it, can all be thought of using this framework. And it may take you to a different place in deciding how you want to do something, or analyzing what's going on so that you can make better use of it. Okay, so let's talk about designing choreography. I'm just going to switch mics here so I can pace around without having to worry about tripping over a cord. So let's imagine a dancer. He's dancing along. He's in the square somewhere. And he hears a call. Now, what's going on in the dancer's head in order to process that call? Well, the first thing is, remember, System 1 is always watching what's happening. And System 1 has built on a continuous basis and continues to update what I call a context, meaning it's System 1's impression of the way things are now. And then based on System 1's impression of the way things are now, what might possibly happen. So System 1 is watching first of all, System 1 knows the level we're dancing. How many people buy that? The dancers know the level they're dancing. You think they do?
Well, I think they have their own level, and they understand what their level is.
I wasn't sure about that until I thought of something. If you call teacup chain on a C1 floor, what do you get? You get chaos and a lot of snarling is what you get. But if you took those same dancers, told them they were at a plus dance, and they heard teacup chain, what do you think would happen? They just do it. So the reason that you get the chaos and the snarling in the C1 floor is because the C1 dancers know they're dancing C1, and they know that nobody calls teacup chain at C1, even though it's available as a call that you could use. It's just not part of the normal repertoire. And that knowledge is part of what System 1 has as the context that you're working in. So System 1 has this context that's built up based on sort of knowing what's going on around it, knowing what's going on right now. For instance, the call that's going on right now. So if the call that's going on right now is swing through, System 1 might be saying, okay, where am I going to be after this is over? And at some point, now some of us may think that dancers never know where they're going to wind up. And that may be true at the beginning of a lot of calls. I don't know how many dancers know where they're going to end up at the end of a motivate or something. But dancers at some point in the call know where they're going to end up. They know where they're going to be in the formation. They're going to know what kind of movement they had at the end of the formation. They're going to know which way they were turning, and they're going to know sort of which way their body was moving so that they can figure out whether they could roll or sweep or do any one of those things that might follow as a suffix call. So dancers at some point in the call form an expectation of where they're going to be and how they're going to be moving at the end of the call. So that's the context. Now, what happens once that context becomes set in System 1? System 1 recognizes what it thinks this context is. It forms what I call a prefetch list. How many people are from the old IT world where, the big mainframes prefetched instructions to try and speed things up? So that's where I got that name from. It just popped into my head. System 1 served it up to me, and I thought, why not, So, so this prefetch list is a list of calls that might possibly follow what's going on now. And that prefetch list will be based on the context that System 1 has built up. Part of that context is, what have you done recently from this situation? If you do swing through, boys run 12 times in a row, what do you think that dancer is going to expect when they hear swing through? They'll do the boys run without you even saying it. And that's because their System 1 is going to make a very, very strong prediction that the next call is going to be a boys run. But there will be other calls that it might have in kind of a list that could possibly also happen. Maybe you might have the boys trade. I personally hate that, but just see it a lot. So the dancer will have some expectations of what might happen next. And these will be, this prefetch list will be formed almost instantaneously, and the dancer will not know consciously that this list has been formed. So now the call comes in. They actually hear the next call. Now, if the next call is in fact boys run, something in the prefetch list, System 1 serves that back to System 2 and says, yep, it was exactly what I expected. Go ahead and do it. So System 2 receives that for execution as kind of like, yeah, we're just same old, we're doing that. If the next call was box the gnat, System 1 might say, that wasn't in my prefetch list. I'm not expecting a box the gnat. I better do another search. So System 1 will do another associative search of your memory, and it'll find box the gnat, because box the gnat is in fact a call that the dancer knows, and it's actually a position that it can be done from, but it's not done very often. And maybe if this dancer doesn't have a lot of experience, they may never have seen it from there. Okay? But System 1 will serve that back to System 2 as, okay, it wasn't what I expected, but I know how to do it. And here's how you do it. And what it's serving back to System 2 is the dancer's mental model of that call. So it's not just serving back this is okay. It's serving back a whole whack of information about what the action of that call is, what formations it can be done from. It'll serve back where the dancer is in that formation, and what, as a result of where they are in that formation, what they're going to do with that call. All of that comes back. That's all part of the mental model that the dancer has in their mind of how that call works. Now, System 2, when they receive that, it sort of comes back with a flag that says, well, it wasn't exactly what I expected, but you can do it. And here's all the information that you need to do it. And System 2 will receive that with some surprise. And that's the kind of thing that dancers experience as, neat. Or, something else. Depending on how well they know how to do this. But there'll be this sort of start, this hesitation. Now, if it's something that they do know how to do, it was just unexpected, the dancer may experience sort of a mental hiccup or pause, but they probably won't stop moving. If you were just watching them, it might appear to you that they've just danced it seamlessly, and they just zipped through it. But they would have had this mental experience of a little hesitation and a little, that was different, or that was neat. Now let's suppose the call was box the gnat, and you're dealing with a dancer that has never seen a box the gnat from a wave. So their System 1 would go in and they would have no model for that. They have no idea what to do. So that gets served back to System 2 as what? And now System 2 says, well, let's go through our rational, stepwise problem-solving process to figure out what we're going to do now. And System 2 might say, System 1, find me the definition of this call that I read in the CALLERLAB book. Sure. And let's see now, in the CALLERLAB book it says I do this stuff for a boxed gnat, and oh, here's a thing that says that some calls that are normally done from facing couples can be done from ocean waves. Is this one of those? Yes, I guess it is. So in that case, I can pretend that I'm in a facing couple, and then it would kind of look like this. And if the dancer can go through that process, they have solved the problem of what to do with that call. Now, that's never going to happen at dance speed, right? We dance 125, 130 beats a minute, less than half a second between each step. So there's no way you're going to do that kind of logical, rational problem solving at dance speed. So what happens then is the dancer stops moving. They look up at the ceiling like, what am I going to do with this now? And let's see if I can, so they're not dancing anymore. They're solving a problem. Now, if they don't solve the problem, they're frustrated. And especially if other people solve the problem, now they're frustrated and humiliated. So that's not good. But if they do solve the problem, that solution goes back to System 1 and becomes part of System 1's repertoire. And the next time they hear that, hopefully, the next time they hear that, System 1 will serve it back as, oh, unusual, but I know how to do it. Now, if you don't do it again for 200 years, you'll probably forget that. But if it's reinforced another couple of times, it'll become part of System 1's repertoire for that combination of calls and situations. So that's how dancers acquire experience. It's by solving a problem or having something processed through System 2 and then pushed down into System 1, where later it can be automatically accessed. So that's the model of what's going on as people are dancing. Now, could I have a square? So I'm just going to do a little bit of calling here, sort of get you used to my voice and all that stuff. I promise I'm not going to hurt you, so don't be nervous. Gonna bow to the partner, corner 2, the hips lead up to the right, circle up 4. Gonna break right out to a line of 4 and then do a right and left through, gonna turn them on around and then pass through with a wheel and deal. Little tight there, double pass through. First couple go left and the next go right. And pass through with a wheel and deal. Centers pass through, put centers in, then you cast them off 3/4. The ends cross fold, the center square through 3. Thank you. Now, I didn't do that to quote, embarrass anybody. In fact, you guys can sit down. You're a perfect demonstration. So in light of what I just explained about the way System 1 and System 2 are interacting, what just happened there? So first I called some stuff that was kind of acclimatization stuff. How many of you had ever danced with me before? So 1 or 2. But most of you didn't know my voice, didn't know my cadences for delivering and all that stuff. So I just did some stuff to get them moving. I used some patterns that they had heard before, right? I did stuff that was just automatic for them. And in fact, what I did is I lulled them into a sense of complacency. Do we ever do that? So what's happening there is if you give dancers a series of calls that are all being retrieved by System 1 as high probability, this is what's going on, high probability, this is what's going on, this is comfortable, I know what's happening, I know what's going to happen next. You do that even for just a few calls. And System 2 says, I wonder what I'm going to have for dinner. System 2 kind of wanders away. Now, if System 2 starts looking at things that are still related to the dancing, that's not so bad. So if you're calling, quote, wind in your face stuff, meaning you're calling things that the dancers can process automatically, because the only stuff that dancers can actually dance to the music is stuff that's coming out of System 1. As soon as you make them think, actually process something in System 2, you can almost guarantee they're going to stop moving. So wind in your face means it's all System 1. All System 1 means that System 2 is no longer engaged. But if it's real wind in your face and the dancers are enjoying the movement, System 2 might be thinking, hey, this feels really good. Or listen to that music he's using. That's a neat piece of music. So it's still related to the dancing. When they start thinking about, I have to take the car in for an oil change next week, and stuff like that, that's thinking that has nothing to do with the dancing. And the longer that goes on, the more likely what System 2 is doing is liable to generate a task that goes back to System 1 and interrupts its processing of the dancing. And how many of you had that experience where you're dancing something you're really comfortable with and you're just dancing along, and then all of a sudden it all blows up on you and you're not really sure what happened? And it's because it's not that even something happened that you didn't know how to do. It's just you stopped listening. And you gave a task to System 1 that had nothing to do with the dancing, and it didn't have enough cycles in there, to speak in computer talk again, didn't have enough processing power to be able to handle the dance processing along with whatever this other task was that you shifted down. Yeah. So I lulled you into this false sense of security, and then I did a put centers in from an 8-chain through, which is unusual. So I said put centers in, cast off 3/4. What you heard was words that you're used to hearing. You're used to hearing the words, put centers in, cast off 3/4. But you're not used to hearing them from there. And the feel of the dance action is totally different. I did an ends cross fold. So, that required the people that had just finished a cast, except they hadn't finished it because, they were still trying to figure out how to do it. And I had the centers, and after I said the ends cross fold, right away I said the centers square through 3. So I even took away the ends reference points to figure out where the cross fold was going to take them, because I got the centers moving too. Now all of that was choreography which, if the dancers had been familiar with it, was smooth. They could have danced that no problem at all. Scott?
Well, my mind when I was dancing was going, okay, when's it coming? When's it coming?
Yeah. I mean,
So my whole brain is thinking, now does that come from System 2 or System 1?
Yeah.
Because if that's happening, then I'm doing this all the time.
Yeah. And why was that? Because of the context that we're in, right? Your System 1 is saying he's going to sandbag us with something here. You knew. Yeah. So because of the context, the dancers were maybe expecting something that was going to be a little different. But the point was, I didn't give you time for System 1 to come back and say, I don't know that from here, and System 2 to say, now let's see, it was really just the centers in so that they spread apart and I step up in here. And then I've got an inverted line. Everybody recognize that's what you'd have. I have an inverted line, and I got some people with left hands and some people with right hands, so the cast off feels funny for some. The dancer would have to go through all of that. And then after the cast off, the dancers would have to realize, well, the ends are facing out, so they can do a cross fold, and then the centers are facing in, so they can do something with each other. But of course, by then it's gone. Now, we all know that I could have delivered that differently and gotten the dancers through it. So if I danced them into that position and I'd stopped maybe, or even if I just said, careful now, put centers in, and paused, because there's no way they're going to do it if they haven't seen it before, right? They're going to stop and put centers in. I'm a center. And they have to spread it. Get out of the way, and they go through that kind of thought process, but it ain't going to happen to the music. Now, after that had happened, I probably could have called the cast off 3/4, and the ends cross fold fairly smoothly, because the action of centers in suddenly changed the context that System 1 is working in. System 1 was thinking, oh, it's all wind in your face. I know all this stuff. Now System 1 is thinking, holy, I don't know what's going on. I got to watch everything. The prefetch list changes, right? Because now he's moved from, he's not doing wind in your face stuff anymore. He's doing puzzles. So now the prefetch list changes, which makes it more likely that something unusual is going to come back looking like I know how to do it. So I've definitely beaten on that long enough. So that's what's going on in a dancer's mind. So when you're designing choreography, how many of you think you design choreography? Please, everybody, put up your hand. You design choreography, even if you're sight calling, you're still designing the choreography because you're trying to create some kind of effect with it. At least I hope you are. And the principal thing that we're doing as we're manipulating choreography is we're really managing difficulty. Now, the thing that's different about modern Western dancing from the related dance forms like contras and traditional squares and that sort of thing is that the related forms are set pattern types of dancing. A dance is designed, usually to a piece of music, choreographed to that music. The dancers are taught the pattern, and they do it over and over again, and the dance does not vary. So the dancers quickly get used to what's going on. And what people that are doing that are looking for, where they're deriving their enjoyment, is from the feeling of moving to the music, the feelings of the motion. The choreography itself is of secondary interest to them in terms of something that they find, quote, interesting. It's interesting if you can do some pattern, if you can learn some pattern that feels good, then it's interesting. Modern Western square dancers, they are intrigued by the fact that they don't know what's coming. That's the principal difference. They don't know what's coming. And so they want to be surprised by what's coming. On the other hand, as we've just demonstrated, if they're surprised all the time, there's not a whole bunch of dancing going on. They just wind up standing on the floor being surprised over and over again. And that doesn't feel very good. So what we're doing as choreographers is we're trying to manage the line between letting them dance in System 1, where it's automatic, mostly effortless, mild surprises, and they can keep moving. And every once in a while, we take them up to System 2, make them think about something, not very long. The amount that we make them think depends on the program that we're calling. So in general, mainstream and plus dancers, they want to be moving all the time. When I'm calling at a plus dance, I don't expect squares to be going down. I'm trying to keep the whole floor moving. If I'm calling a C2 dance, I'll put up with about 75% of the square or the floor only moving and 25% down on a regular basis, because that's what challenge dancers expect. In fact, challenge dancers, if they look around and see the whole damn floor is doing what you're doing, they'll come up and tell you you're not calling hard enough. So their measure of, how good the dance is the fact that they're doing something that somebody else isn't. So modern Western dancers are looking for this sense of surprise, and they're looking for a feeling of accomplishment, the fact that they've achieved something. And Tommy Miller had the best description of this. I've repeated this over and over again. He says what you're doing is you're marching them up to the edge of the cliff, and you're letting them look over, and then you're grabbing them by the heels, and you're hanging them by their heels over the cliff and letting them look at the raging rapids below. But you're never letting them go. So they get that feeling of, I'm just on the edge. I don't know if I can really do this. It's all going to fall apart any minute, but you get it. And you're successful. That gives the dancers a sense of accomplishment. So when you take a dancer and you push whatever's going on into System 2, give them a problem they can solve, even if they have to stop momentarily to solve it the first time, and then get that feeling of accomplishment of, I figured it out. And that goes back into System 1 so that the next time they see it, they can dance it smoothly. And especially if that happens fairly soon after they first learned it, they really feel like, I figured something out here. That gives them that real sense of accomplishment. That's what we're trying to do as choreographers. We're trying to create that feeling. And that is really managing difficulty. So, looking at our model, what's difficult? So something that System 1 executes is easy. If it comes back from System 1 as, I know this, I expected this, it's exactly what I've done 1,000 times before, then that's perceived as easy. Maybe too easy. If it comes back with that sense of surprise, like, I didn't expect that, but I know how to do it, or that was neat, then it's perceived as interesting or creative. If it comes back with, I don't know what the hell is going on, then it's perceived as hard. And if you bump it up to System 2 so that System 2 has to do more than a sanity check on it, actually has to figure something out, it will be perceived as hard. Now, if you do it 3 more times after System 2 has figured it out, it will become easy because System 1 will start serving it back as the automatic answer. So this tells you something as callers when you're designing your choreography. There's been other sessions here. I actually don't know if it's happened or if it's about to happen. But there's a session on choreo build-up where you take something that's really difficult. Over the course of a tip or an evening, you build the building blocks that the dancers need to have in order to accomplish this thing. You slowly build their contexts for their System 1s so that finally, at the end of the evening, System 1 can dance this stuff to the music. And you build it a piece of a time. You build that context. So that's what you're doing as a choreographer. Now, we only have a few more minutes. That was a little more abbreviated than I was planning to for designing choreography. But let me just talk to the difference between creative and tricky. Fine line, right? So creative is when something comes back from System 1 as surprising, but I can do it. That's creative. When something comes back from System 1 as wrong, so you lead the dancers into having their System 1 produce an answer that is just wrong, and that can only be rectified by having System 2 examine the situation and realize, this is not what we originally thought it was. There's other parameters around it in some way. But if it comes back from System 1, strongly recommended but wrong, then the dancers will fail. And they will regard themselves as having been abused. So you need to be really careful about that. You never want to set them up so that they're actually going to get a wrong answer from their instinctive reactions unless you give them time to recover from that. So, first of all, don't do that kind of thing without knowing you're doing it. And secondly, if you do it, it becomes a joke or a gimmick or, teasing the dancers. Again, that's sort of a fine line, we'll play games with each other. But you need to be aware when you're doing something like that. If you're leading them down the garden path and then going to do something that will cause them to fail, you better have a way to get them back feeling successful pretty quick. And we do that sometimes with tricks, right? We'll have a gimmick or a trick or something that, the dancers actually don't really know what the hell happened, but their corner's right there so they could do an Allemande left, and they figure, well, okay, and I'm not really sure what happened, but it must be good, right? We play these games with the dancers, but that's what you need to be aware of is having something where System 1 makes a strong prediction that is just wrong. Okay, let's talk briefly about teaching, because this is the probably the most contentious thing that I've formed in my own mind about how we should apply this to teaching, what it means for teaching. When dancers are dancing, the single most important element in their context for System 1, the single most important thing that System 1 is using as it's building this sense of what's going on around me, is the definition of the call. So the name comes into System 1. System 1 hears this call, and that brings out of memory the mental model that dancer has for that call. And the nature of that mental model is the most important thing that governs how they're going to process what they hear next. So it's really important that that mental model not be too generic or not be too specific. So I'm not going to get a square up. You guys can picture this. Let's take a call like, I had a better example in my head and I've forgotten. Let's take a call like scoot back. That's in the handout. So if you're teaching scoot back, fess up. How many have done it this way? Head square through 4. Touch a quarter. And then that's the first place the dancers see scoot back from. How many of you have done that? Okay. And then here's an explanation that I heard after that setup. Boys go in, take right hands, turn half by the right, step back out so that you're in the position of the girl who's beside you. Girls run into the boys' position. And that was the explanation. And the dancers all did it. No problem. How many of you have a problem with that teach? Oh, good. Thank you. I'm preaching to the choir here. But if we think of it in terms of our System 1 and System 2 model, what you're trying to impart to the dancers is something that's going to be embedded in System 1 that they're going to use to figure out how to do that call. So with that teach, without you having said anything, what you've just embedded is it's right-handed, it's boy-girl, and it's done in ocean waves. That's what you've just embedded. So the first time you try and do it in a column, they're toast. The first time you try and do it with the girls looking in, you've got to explain it all over again. And then you confuse them because you told them it was boys going in and, what you mean the girls could go in too? That's totally different for the dancers. So you've started to embed a mental model with that teach that now you have to start undoing partially in order to show them other ways, other places the call might be done. Here's the way I would recommend that you teach scoot back. Have the heads have the heads star through or slide through. Heads touch quarter. Now have the heads do the scoot back. And right away so the boys would go in that first case, have the girls do another scoot back right away in that box of 4 so that the girls go in. You don't tell them as you explain the call that the boys go in and the girls do the thing. You say that the people looking in go forward. And what hand do they take? Inside hand. Don't talk about right and left. Talk about inside, outside. Talk about leaders and trailers because that's the way that call is defined. And it's not only that it's defined that way. I don't mean defined in the sense of it's written in the book that way. It's executed that way. What the dancer has to decode in order to figure out how to do that call. And this is in your handout, and this sounds ridiculous when you say it out loud, but in fact, this is what's going on. Dancer hears the call. First thing they need to know, how many people does it take to do this call? Because until I know how many people it takes to do the call, I can't go hunting for them. So once I know how many people are in the call, I can go hunting for a formation that might have that many people in it. Oh, now I need to know what formations those people might be in. So I got to retrieve all information about the possible formations that number of people could be organized in. Then I have to figure out where I am in that formation because knowing where I am in the formation tells me what role I might be playing in this call. So if we take our example of the heads slide through and touch a quarter, and I'll imagine I'm the head boy because that's what I always imagine, and I'm decoding this call. I'm thinking to myself, okay, I need to find 4 people. Well, he made it easy. I got these 4 people in this box in the middle that he's talking to, so it must be those 4 people. And where am I in this box of 4? Well, I'm a trailer. How many of your basic dancers think of themselves as leaders and trailers? Why the hell not? Our calls all work that way. You know, we shouldn't be talking leaders and trailers and bows and bells and ends and centers and all this stuff. Rubbish. That's the way our calls work. And if you don't sort of imprint that terminology, I'm not saying we have to teach them a bunch of jargon and lexicons, but when you describe a call, describe it in those terms. You've got some people standing in front of other people. They're the leaders. You've got some people that are looking at people's backs. They're the trailers. That's as much as you have to do. After you've done that a few dozen times for different calls, they start to get the idea. But so he's thinking to himself, I'm a trailer, and therefore my role in this call as a trailer is I'm going to go in and take the inside hand and all of that stuff. But he had to decode all that stuff he had to pull all that information out of memory in order to figure out what he was going to do. And that's system 1. Every single call they process is done that way. It sounds ridiculous, doesn't it, that all that stuff is going on. But that's what's going on in your head. That's how good system 1 is at matching a pattern, pulling information out about that pattern, and giving you some instruction as to what to do. And in just a second. If you doubt that, think about people like chess masters. You ever watched a chess master walking up and down a row of tables playing like 15 people at the same time? Do you think they're really thinking about what's going on in each game? They look down at that game, they see a pattern. Their system 1 has had thousands and thousands and thousands of hours of looking at chessboard patterns and figuring out what that means in terms of strengths and weaknesses and how an offense or a defense might work. And they can come up with an instantaneous answer about what their best move is in that situation and move on. So if you can believe a chess master does that, why can't you believe that a dancer could figure all this stuff out in their system 1? It's really a simpler problem when you think about it. So that's what's going on in a dancer's head as they're decoding calls. Now, you had a question?
Yeah, actually, it's kind of a comment on microphone, please.
Oh, yes. This is being recorded.
Oh, okay. Scott Byers, Sacramento, California. First of all, carrying the definition in System 1 seems like a contradiction. I would imagine that the definition is in System 2 because the definition has little nuances in it that has to make you process it, whereas System 1 would be something that you would process instantly. And very few people process the definition instantly.
You're absolutely right. If you think of the definition in terms of what we've got written in our definitions book, you're absolutely right. But when you think about what people are carrying in their head, the patterns, it's the result of somehow or other processing that definition. Now, maybe they read it themselves. Maybe their caller taught them something about that call. Now, most dancers that are dancing basic and mainstream and plus have never looked at a written definition. Right? I'm not saying that as a criticism, right? Why would they do that? My caller taught me what to do. So they form their model based on what their caller has explained to them, and maybe and also what they've seen as they've danced in other places, which is why it's so important to have your dancers dance to other callers so that they, get used to what other people do. But the point is that the definition that becomes the operating definition that the dancer is using is in System 1. Because they can't dance to the music unless that's in System 1. So it starts out in the outside world as a written definition or an explanation or a series of experiences that they might have gone through that get processed through System 2, right? System 2 kind of, when you first teach dancers anything, did they dance it to the music? right? It's all stop and start, and they're, what do you mean? Am I a leader or trailer? What the hell does that mean? All that stuff, they don't dance to the music. They dance more slowly because they don't have it in System 1 yet. Everything they're doing is a System 2 rational step-by-step process, trying to figure out whatever this model is, how it relates to the situation. It's only after some repetition that gets pushed down into System 1. And that's the good news about all this, is that you can push very, very complicated things down into System 1. And anytime you look at somebody who's an expert in anything, most of what they're doing, which may seem like a lot of intellectual processing, most of what they're doing is being done by System 1, regardless of what it is. There's a rule of thumb that was in some book or other saying that you need 10,000 hours to make an expert. So it takes 10,000 hours to make an expert in anything. I can't remember if that was Malcolm Gladwell or somebody came up with that. But what he's really saying is that it takes a certain number of hours of experience and concentration on something to drive complex tasks down into System 1. So when you're dealing with people who are highly trained and experienced in something, surgeons and chess masters and bridge players that play at the top echelons and whatnot, all this complicated stuff for them has been driven down into System 1, so that the only decisions their System 2s are making are the very unusual, complicated cases that they don't have in System 1 yet. And every time they figure out one of these new, unusual, complicated cases, it gets pushed down into their System 1, becomes part of System 1's repertoire for pattern matching and figuring things out. How long have I got? 5 minutes. I'm going to stop talking now, and if there's any questions, I see Robert has a question at the back.
Thank you, Robert Hurst from England. I've got a question for you, Barry. I've never heard of this System 1, System 2 before, but I see it as a very strong tool for me as a caller. And my question is, if I call... I set up the dancer and I say, I'm going to teach you relay the Barry Clasper. And they will go to System 1, they can't find it. So they're going to go around searching in System 2. Well, I want them listening to me rather than them going off searching System 2. So what I tend to do, and I'd like to know whether this is proper or suitable based on this system, is I will teach the dance pattern first and move them around a few times, and then name it, and then reiterate the dance pattern.
The theory says that it's always better to provide the name of the call first. And the reason for that is it provides a tag or a mnemonic that System 1 can associate with that action. It makes it easier for System 1 to catalog it, if you like. But in practice, there are some things that it's easier to teach exactly the way that you said. You have a dance action that you can cue and get people through it, get them used to it. And I've done that myself, where you take them through something several times, and then you may tell them, now, this thing that we've just been doing is called X, and then, in effect, teach it and show them that which parts of this thing they've just been doing are actually that call. Sometimes that's a more effective way to do it, and it comes back to judgment. But the theory is that it's better to have, the sooner you can give them the tag to store that action away against, and the sooner that you can associate that tag with where it starts and where it ends, so that they don't, the thing with doing it in a pattern is that some dancers may see things that are not part of the pattern as part of the pattern. Because, they may remember what came just before it or what came just after it and associate it with that pattern. That's the danger of doing that. But you can do things which will make that less likely to happen. Any other questions? Scott.
Do you want me to use the microphone? Or? Oh, okay.
Well, yeah.
Scott Byer, Sacramento.
We got 3 minutes according to my watch.
Some observations that I made over the 40 years that I've been calling. There are some dancers that do not dance by definition, that dance only by patterns. And there are several, in fact, there are challenge dancers that I know of, specifically a couple of women in particular come to my mind, that you give them a definition, don't give me the definition. I just need to do it.
Muscle memory dancers, we call them.
Only can dance in System 1. So what you have to do to teach them is you have to do repetitive patterns of those formations until they get it. I'm just assuming that that's how we use this.
Right. If you need to repeat things in order to drive them down into System 1 until System 1 recognizes that as a pattern.
So System 1, based on what you said, System 1 recognizes multiple patterns.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. So
in fact, it recognizes patterns that aren't there. That's
okay.
One of the difficulties in the human brain is that we see all kinds of things that aren't really there.
The question then comes to mind, and I don't even think you can answer this, is how many repetitions does it take to get to the bottom of a Tootsie Roll Pop? No. How many repetitions does it take to get it into System 1? And is that an individual thing by each person?
Well, if you listen to Malcolm Gladwell, it takes 10,000 hours to learn Scootback.
Okay. I'm not going to live that long.
But of course, the real answer is it depends on the complexity of what you're trying to absorb. Sure. So things that are simple will become assimilated by System 1 very quickly. And the more complicated something is, the more practice and repetition it takes in order for it to be absorbed by System 1. And in terms of teaching dancers, you can get your own sense of how well they're absorbing it by how they dance. So if you're still seeing them thinking about something after 25 repetitions, then they need more repetitions. But if you're finding that, you call these 5 calls, just call them smoothly to the music and they all just do it and they don't look like they're pulling their hair out trying to figure out what's going on, well then that's been driven down. And you just get that through observation.
Another question. What does this system have to do with, or what is the arrangement between volatile memory and permanent memory in System 1 and System 2? Because that's our biggest problem in teaching square dancing. We can put a whole bunch of calls into temporary or into volatile memory, but the next week you go to have the calls and it's gone. It's no longer in permanent memory.
That's an excellent point. You can teach dancers something during an evening. You can teach them something relatively complicated, and during that evening drive it down into System 1. If they see it again the next afternoon, then it'll still be sort of in System 1. Some of it may have started to fade, but it'll still be there, and you can get it back really quick. If you don't use it next week or the week after, it's gone. Right. And in fact, when you start using it next week, it'll probably be gone, but it'll come back a lot more quickly. So repetition is important, not just repetition as you're teaching it, but repetition, in subsequent occasions during your program while you're teaching. And I know you hear dancers report that a lot of callers will teach something and they'll never use it again, for 6 weeks, and then all of a sudden they'll throw it out there and expect the dancers to know it. Whatever you've taught, you better use over and over and over again. And that gets to be hard as you start moving through the programs. It's, when you're teaching basic A, well, fine, it's not too hard to use all those calls in a couple of tips. But by the time you're teaching C1 or C2, you just can't do all that stuff. You're halfway through the list, and you can't do it in an evening, never mind in a tip. So it gets to be very difficult to keep that stuff imprinted. And as our dancer population gets older, that becomes more of a problem, because older people take longer to have something driven down into System 1. So I thank you all for your kind attention. I hope you found this valuable. I'm really interested in any comments or thoughts that you might have. You can either come and talk to me directly or write them in your comment sheets, because as I said, this is still a journey that hasn't ended for me. I have not really, despite the fact that I may have sounded like I knew what I was talking about, I'm still trying to figure all this out. So I'm really interested in talking to people about it and getting your thoughts and understanding on it. Thanks again. Go for coffee.